Hi there, you're listening to the Paralegals on Fire podcast show where you'll be getting tips and actionable strategies that you can use right now to fast track your paralegal career. I'm your host, Ann Pearson, former paralegal and paralegal manager who left big law in the concrete jungle to start my own company, the Paralegal Boot Camp, where we give online courses that help paralegals make more money, increase their job security, and cut out the learning curve. All right, let's jump right into today's episode. Why won't they hire me for those remote paralegal jobs? That's the question that I got sent in for my VIP. Send me any question and I'll answer it. If you missed it, last week was our first question that got sent in that I answered. And this week I'm answering a question. This one's not anonymous. This is a question from Habiba. So thank you, Habiba. I'm going to read you the question in its entirety, and then I'm going to answer it. So she writes, "Hello, Ann. Hope you're doing well." I am. Thank you. "I've been following you for quite a while now on LinkedIn, and I find your content extremely valuable. Habiba, I'm sorry that I haven't been posting much on LinkedIn lately. I don't know if you guys know, I've been taking a break on social media, but I am going to get back on there and start posting. So I apologize for that, Habiba, but you must be on my email list or you wouldn't have been able to reply to this. So you must be getting my content by email. All right. So she writes, "Especially as someone who has worked as a litigation paralegal in a law firm in Karachi, Pakistan." I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but so she's worked as a litigation paralegal in Pakistan and now wants to transition to the American legal market in a remote capacity. I did my LLB honors, congratulations, from University of London, which is a degree equivalent to the JD degree in the U.S. Currently, I'm actively looking for remote jobs in the U.S., but all the remote paralegal jobs that I have come across are for people who are located in the U.S. What is your take on this, and what advice would you give to a remote worker outside the U.S. who is eager to learn from attorneys and paralegals in the U.S. and contribute effectively with her skill set? Kind regards, Habiba." All right, so this is kind of a tricky question, but so Habiba, the short answer is not in the way that you're probably thinking in terms of getting a role as a remote paralegal in the U.S. And the reason is that the title paralegal is not a job title in the U.S. It's a profession. And as much as you have what you're calling the equivalent of a JD degree, I know that they call it a Bachelor of Law degree over there, but it's not really. So let's start with what's called the remote. You're looking for these remote paralegal positions. Let's start with that. When you're searching for a remote paralegal position in the U.S., those remote paralegal positions are for someone who is a U.S. paralegal who is working from home in the U.S. And in fact, most of them don't even want paralegals who are in another state because laws that are in New York can be different from, say, laws in Florida. They can be a little bit flexible, but usually attorneys who are practicing in New York want paralegals who are familiar with New York rules of civil procedure. And so they don't even want paralegals who are in a different state. Sometimes they're a little bit flexible. Usually the only way that's happening is if the paralegal used to be working with that attorney in New York and they move because maybe their husband gets transferred or their wife gets transferred to work in Florida and they move in Florida. That's usually how that happens. But so when you're reading these jobs for a remote paralegal, it's in the U.S. The reason why they're not meaning someone outside the U.S. is because the laws in the U.S., the federal rules of civil procedure, are entirely different than what you learned in your program, in your legal program in the University of London. So your LLB taught you the laws for the UK. It taught you the legal theory and application of those laws. It didn't teach you the laws of the US. I'll give you a perfect example. Back when I was a paralegal manager, I would have people like you who would apply for positions who they were living in the US. They had moved from one of the foreign countries and they were living in Atlanta, Georgia, and they would come and apply for a paralegal position. And I couldn't hire them because it would literally be like I would have to train them from the ground up. And they were expecting high salaries, rightfully, because they would have this degree that they spent a lot of money on over there. And they didn't know anything about being a litigation paralegal. I would literally have to train them as if they just graduated from a paralegal certificate program. And not even that. They didn't even know what the newly graduated paralegal certificate people did, because they didn't know anything about the federal rules of civil procedure. They didn't know anything about the notice of deposition, the complaint. They didn't know any of that. And so I would ask, you want to learn. I admire that you want to learn from U.S. attorneys and U.S. paralegals. I would ask, what's your ultimate career goal? So you've worked as a litigation paralegal in a law firm in Pakistan. You got your degree from the University of London. You got an LLB there. Is your goal ultimately that you want to come to the U.S. and you want to work as a paralegal, or eventually an attorney? If that's the case, then I would highly recommend that you get a U.S. education, that you get a paralegal certificate from a U.S. accredited school. That's really the only way you're going to be able to get a job, even a remote job. You've got to get a U.S. education. If your goal is to work as a paralegal over there, right, in Pakistan or London or wherever, then you've got the education for that. So you're probably better off focusing your attention on really finding a good job there. The other thing that I would caution you about is some of the remote jobs that you might see advertised are actually these, what I would call not so reputable outsourcing companies that are trying to hire or entice you into working for them for what I would call subpar or ridiculously low amounts of money. So let's say a normal paralegal in the United States might be paid $20, $25 an hour starting, or $30 an hour, depending on the experience, right? But they know that over there, you don't normally make that amount of money. Maybe in Pakistan, you're paid the equivalent of $10, 10 US dollars per hour, or $5 US dollars per hour. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a company approach me who is a US-based company, a staffing company, who all they hire are people in the Philippines. And these people call themselves legal assistants. And they hire them. They have thousands of them working for them, outsourced in the Philippines. And because in the Philippines, they accept $3 to $4 per hour, and they accept it because they can eat on that, and that's an acceptable wage for them. This outsourcing company in the U.S. charges lawyers $10 per hour, and the lawyers who think that that's a decent wage are lawyers who don't respect or value paralegals. They're not really doing paralegal work, though. They're doing more administrative assistant type work. So they're doing that, and they're paying them that, and they're devaluing the paralegal profession by doing that. And so you want to be careful that you're not also participating in something like that. right? Where they think they can get away with it because you're maybe not, you're used to being paid $4 per hour, right? So be careful that an ad that you respond to, you might think, oh, I'm excited. I got somebody responding to me. I'm replied to, or they replied to my remote job, right? You think that it's something good. You saw something that was a remote job for needing a paralegal in the US, and they accept you because you're in Pakistan. Just be prepared. If it's that easy, there's probably some type of, I don't want to say scam behind it, but be prepared. If they want to pay you less than $25 per hour, they're probably taking advantage of you. So that's one of the things I would say. All right, let me just make sure that I got everything here from Habiba. All right, I know that it didn't sound as positive. Some of these questions, I hope what I'm doing is saving you from either spending money on things unnecessarily or making sure that you're aware of things that, could cost you money or cost you extra time. And so, Habiba, I would just sit down and ask yourself, what do you want to do with the time and money that you've already spent on this education that you've got, which is great. If you want to work in the U.S., I would highly suggest that you get a U.S. education and then apply for those jobs that you really want. But my other advice is please don't let those other companies take advantage of you. All right, that's it for this one. Can't wait to see what the next question is from you guys. Have a great day. Bye. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, hit the subscribe button in whatever platform you're listening. And please take a quick minute and leave a review of the podcast. And share this episode with just one colleague or friend who you think would benefit from what we discussed today. Share the knowledge, and the entire paralegal profession elevates. See you next week. Bye for now.